Okay, so March's book again was called The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut, and my book I purchased on Amazon used. It was previously a member of the library. Where was this? At North High School in Waukesha, Wisconsin. That's where my book came from originally, which is kind of. I was thinking about that. I was kind of on brand for Vonnegut. I feel like, oh yeah, this came from a high school library. Like that's where most people probably start their adventures with this author. So, um, yeah. So a couple of things that might not be super popular. Um, just kind of overall kind of take on the book. I thought it was okay. I was not a huge fan um, of the book, and I'm not. I think I've decided now, after reading like a handful of Vonnegut books, that I'm not really a fan of Kurt Vonnegut in general. That may take away some of my street cred, but I'm just kind of being honest here. I just kind of don't really connect with his writing very well. And I feel like I should. Like, I just feel like reading through this stuff, I'm like, this is like the kind of stuff that I should be chewing through. And I'm just not. I just didn't. Like, I sprinted through about the first half of the book, and then I put it down for a few days and kind of I didn't really feel the desire to kind of like go back to it too much. I was kind of like, I pretty much know what's going to happen here, and I don't really care. Maybe that's the point of some of these characters, um, but I sat down and finished it, and it ended kind of like as I expected it to end, and I was kind of like left at the end like, okay, like I read it. I can say that I read it. I thought it was okay. Like I gave it like I think a 3 out of 5 on Goodreads, and my scale is like 1 is hated it, 2 is didn't like it, 3 is thought it was okay, wouldn't recommend it, 4 was like very good, would recommend, and 5 is like favorite books of all time in that category. So a 5's hard to get, but it was like that was okay. And okay, so this book was written in 1959, so it's 60. It's 60 years old now, which is crazy to think about because um, just some of the themes and some of the settings in the book are uh, when I'm imagining them, when I'm reading them, I can kind of I would put them because it kind of takes place in a somewhat dystopian future, and I kind of like when I was reading it, I was kind of setting it in like my vision of the near future, and I don't know if when he was writing it, this was probably considered. This was before the moon landing, um, alleged moon landing. This was way off in the future, right? This was like extreme sci-fi. So I couldn't really, um, I couldn't really kind of come to terms with that in my head. I think I was reading it as if it was like written today, which is my fault. But still, um, and it's pulpy and like kind of like people are like it's like kind of like that old school sci-fi, which is like if you look at my channel and the things that I like and the games that I play and the movies that I'm into, like that's totally my jam. Like I love like like retro sci-fi and that sort of thing, but I just didn't connect with that book. I didn't get like that kind of and I don't think I was supposed to with this book, but I wanted to kind of get that kind of like future nostalgia, if that's a thing, from this book. Like you get from like from if you guys were here at the very beginning, like 2000, that song at the beginning is Blue Danube, but it's from 2001. That's why I use it. And 2001 gives me like future nostalgia, where I'm just like, remember how things were in the future when like everyone was. It was like you had these luxury cruise liners going into outer space, and um, there was the video screens to talk to your kids back on Earth and all this other stuff. It was a very like sexy. That movie was a very like sexy, stylized version of a future at that point that was like 50 years ahead of time. Um, and this was a much more bleak kind of vision of the future from the time in which it was written. Um, but it was also kind of like goofy. I don't know. Like it didn't hold up. I don't think. I think that's kind of like this vision of the future didn't really hold up for me. And maybe it's the current state of affairs in the world and kind of like where tech is going now and how many things he got wrong here and the fact that like the Martian ships he describes as like flying saucers. So I was kind of like, it's kind of cheese, a little bit of cheese here. And I think a lot of that stuff, and I think with Vonnegut in general, kind of goes over my head, like, or doesn't really like his sense of humor doesn't really connect with me. So when those kind of moments in the book present themselves, they kind of like land flat with me, and it doesn't. It's not even. I think I'm just missing that stuff because I'm kind of not connecting with it. If that makes any sense. So it's not that like, oh, he's trying to be funny here, and it's not funny. I think I'm just kind of like reading it and going right past it, and not even knowing that like something's supposed to be tongue in cheek or something's supposed to be satirical or ironic or whatever. I just think I just missed a lot of that stuff in the book, and I think I missed a lot of that in his writing. It just doesn't really. Something about it just doesn't really connect with me. So that was one of the problems I had with the book, is that I was just kind of like, oh, like I don't like any of these characters, and it wasn't like, but they also weren't entertaining to me. Like they weren't taking me on an adventure that I wanted to be on, because so basically like what happens in the book is that there is this person or entity that I kept calling Rumsford, even though it's Rumford. Like in my head, I was just like, stop saying Rumsford, but it's Rumford. Winston Niles Rumford. And basically he is this ultra rich guy who has his own personal spaceship, and he goes off to Mars, and there's this thing called a chronosynclastic infundibula, which basically, how I perceived it, was kind of like this wormhole that he flew his ship through, and then he kind of like from that point on he existed between on a plane between, as kind of like this cosmic being between the sun and Betelgeuse. And then every so often when the Earth crossed that path of this beam, let's consider like a string basically, and when the Earth crossed that path, he materialized on Earth at his home in Newport, Rhode Island, which is strange in and of itself. But him and his dog too, because he took his dog on this trip. So his dog Kazakh, who is my favorite character in the book, I don't know if you can see. And this is a picture. I don't know if this is officially licensed by Vonnegut, but he's a bull mastiff. Sweet dogs. So anyways, he materializes like every so often, and he is this all-knowing entity that can kind of like see into the future, and he kind of becomes this like cult-like figure. And so these crowds gather outside his house, and when he materializes, because they want to like view him and see him and hear what he has to say or whatever, but they kind of like close it off to the public except for one person. And they choose, now another issue I had here, they choose this one person, Malachi Constant, to come, and he tells Malachi about like his future, and he's going to go to Mars, and he's going to go to Mercury, he's going to come back to Earth, and then he's going to go to Titan, and he's going to like marry this woman who happens to be Rumford's wife, and they're going to have a child together, and this is all destined to happen. He kind of lays it all out for him. This is very early in the book, so I'm not like spoiling anything here. And then we kind of follow that storyline throughout the course of the book. And now they say in the description here, the richest, most depraved man on earth. Now maybe I don't know the definition of the word depraved. I'm gonna look it up right now. Morally corrupt or wicked, a depraved indifference to human life. Synonyms are corrupt, corrupted, perverted, deviant, degenerate, debased, degraded, immoral. Now that word is a very, very strong word. When I hear the word depraved, I think of like someone without any like concept of like how society's supposed to act, or has no regard, right? It's a depraved indifference to human life. So somebody who has no regard for human life at all. Morally corrupt, wicked. And I never got that from him. Like, and I read the description on the book, I read the description online in several different places, and I was expecting that character to be like this kind of like depraved person in my view, which is how, like, the definition of the word is kind of like what I was expecting this person to be, and I never got that from him. I mean, he's kind of an asshole, but I wouldn't say he was depraved. Vonnegut never put him in a situation or never showed him kind of acting that way. They just kind of like say it in the description and in the book, but we don't really know what that means. And it was kind of like, again, maybe my fault for reading the back of the book first, but I was expecting to kind of have a certain connection with this character before he was introduced, and I never like got that. I never kind of like felt like that backstory or that description of him was accurate, and it really affected the way that I viewed his character throughout the rest of the book. And I don't, without like spoiling too much of it, I didn't react the way that I don't think I reacted to that character and to his arc in the way that like Vonnegut intended. So that was one of the issues I had. The pacing of the book was a little bit it was interesting. I think it fit the writing style and kind of like the subject matter of the book, because it's out there. Like the book jumps around a lot and like in chunks, you know, and you are kind of like at the beginning of some chapters having to like kind of like reset where you are as far as you know, who are these characters, what's going on here, how far in the future are we, what's happened in the middle, do I need to even really know? And it kind of like jolts you every few chapters, I would say. Like every quarter of the book there's like this big jolt of a change in setting, or in setting and time, in space and time, and you have to really kind of like, it takes you a second to kind of like snap out of it. And it's that actually was one of my favorite parts of the book, was how that was kind of paced, how it was paced, because with the writing style and everything that's going on, there's like a lot of weird things happening in this book, and the way that the events are kind of segmented adds to that feeling of kind of unease and kind of confusion. Because most of the characters in the book are confused the entire book, except for Rumford, because he knows everything that's going to happen before it happens. So he's like this person who knows everything that's going to happen, and he's telling people that it's going to happen, and people are like, well, now that you told me that this is going to happen, does it mean it's going to happen? And most of the stuff happens anyway, but it happens even though they're kind of like, they know about it. They think they can prevent these things from happening, but they wind up happening anyway. And going along with those characters and witnessing their confusion and their kind of unease, or just complete like obliviousness, is that a word, to the things that are going on around them, combined with like, we're doing all this stuff and then all of a sudden we're on Mars. It's like, what's going on? Like, how do we get here? Like, what's, you know, and it all kind of like fills in the gaps afterwards, but it brings you to that point real quick, and then it kind of fills it in throughout the rest of the story. So excuse me, I did like that part of it. The pacing was pretty good, or it fit the theme of the book. But again, overall, I was not a huge fan of this book. Like, I don't think I would read it again. Um, I'm gonna keep it because, like, again, like, Vonnegut is a renowned author, and I think that my kids might want or need to read this book at some point in the future, and it's just a good one to have on the shelf. um, but not. I mean, on the cover it says his best book, but I don't know. I don't know. I didn't connect with it, and I thought it was like okay, and I enjoyed reading it at times, but overall, I would say that I was kind of like meh, a full on meh, like 3 out of 5, 3 out of 5 on this book. Um, um, and I think it's probably because of like the age of the book, and it's because of like Vonnegut's writing style that doesn't really like connect with me, and just kind of like the characters in the book, like I was just didn't really care about what happened to them, which makes it hard when these people are kind of like going through this turmoil and these like terrible things are sometimes happening to these characters, and you're just kind of like like I didn't feel any way about them. You know what I mean? It wasn't that I was like, well, I hope I don't care that these bad things are happening. I was just like, I don't care that anything's happening to these characters, because none of them really kind of like endeared themselves to me in one way or the other. I wasn't rooting against them. I wasn't rooting for them. I was kind of just like following them and watching what happened. And it was just kind of like, I don't think I ever, even though they described Constance several times in the book, I never had like a face to put with him, you know? So, like in my mind's eye, I didn't really construct him as a character in my mind. And that made it hard for me to kind of just like, it would be like watching a android or a crash test dummy like walk through the book. That's kind of how I would equate it. But anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on the book. Again, like, wasn't bad, but I didn't love it. And I mean, if I would say that if you like Vonnegut, probably give it a read. But if you're kind of like iffy about him, then this isn't going to be the book that kind of sells you on him or his writing. Kind of like me. Like I was kind of like on the fence to begin with about Vonnegut, and after reading this book, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm like, I think I know now that I'm probably not a fan of his writing. But that's just me. So. Those are my thoughts on the Sirens of Titan, our March book club book. If you guys are interested in joining the book club, we have you can jump into the Discord and head over to the book club channel, and you guys can keep tabs on what book we're reading and when we're going to do these talks and all that kind of thing, all of that kind of stuff. April's book is called Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel. And I will read real quick maybe I won't. This is pretty long. But this book is rather new. I think it was written in 2016. 2016. And basically it's kind of like in the style of World War Z, where it's like journal entries and interviews. It's like an oral history of this mystery that happens. This girl, when she was 11 years old, like falls through a hole in the ground outside of her ranch in South Dakota. And when they rescue her, they find her kind of sitting underground in the palm of this giant golden hand. And then she becomes a PhD later on and starts leading this investigation as to what this artifact is and who put it there, how it got there, that sort of thing. And I haven't started reading it yet, but I'm really excited to kind of dig into it. So that's our next book, Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel. And we'll be reading that one in April. And we'll be voting on the May book in a couple weeks. Usually I try to do it like middle of the month, and then so that we can kind of have a book chosen and people can put it on hold or buy it or whatever before the next month begins. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Sirens of Titan. I give it one up and one down.